on horseback can see the problem from a distance and realize, uh-oh, he better order the third line that's not doing anything right now in to fix the situation. And he does so, and he saves the battle. Caesar, by the way, names this person as the son of the richest guy in Rome, Crassus, who, if you recall, is one of the members of the first triumvirate along with Caesar and Pompey. So you see, in a way, Caesar still doesn't forget, where his bread is buttered and how to play the wonderful game of politics, and you scratch my back and I scratch yours. Remember, Caesar was allegedly not able to leave Rome at one point because his creditors wouldn't let him out of the city until Crassus paid the bill. Well, now all of a sudden, here in this battle where Caesar doesn't go into depth about much of anything, he goes out of his way to mention a single individual, the son of the guy who paid the debts for him. And oh, by the way, he's basically saying, without that guy, we'd have lost that battle against the Germans. That's a little bit of a honor to the family, isn't it? So maybe paying back a favor, or maybe putting Crassus in debt for a future one. Nonetheless, Caesar's never far from playing the game. In this case, the game is deadly, as you might imagine. These Germans, once again, are supposed to have come with the wagons and the families and the women on the wagons, with the disheveled hair screaming at the men, please don't let us fall into slavery. The problem with having all these women and wagons on the battlefield is obviously that at some point the battle moves from where it started to the wagons and the people in the wagons. And once again, we have a battle where it's implied more than laid out for you, but that the Romans kill a lot of civilians, including some of the relatives of Ariovistus, who somehow gets away, but we don't hear any more from him. The Germans will run miles to the Rhine, Caesar says. There will be more Germans that are just about to come over and help, and as soon as they hear about the big defeat of Ariovistus, they turn around and go home. What Caesar's doing here from a macro perspective, if you think about it, is that there were a bunch of powers that were the power brokers in this region before Caesar intervened, and that would have been last year. So think about how quickly everything's happening. Caesar has essentially neutered one of them, the Helvetian, one of the most powerful tribes of the Celts, is now a shadow of what it was just months before, because of what Caesar did to it. And now this player from outside the Stratego or Risk map board who come in and intervene in Gallic politics is smashed and sent packing back over the Rhine, this thing that Caesar portrays as a border. What's crazy to think about is that all of this has happened in the year 58 BCE. Because when you think about the ancient world, you think about a world that in many cases moves much more slowly than the modern one. And yet Caesar has a blitzkrieg going on in Gaul. He says, and some historians will date 3 battles, some will date 2 battles, depending on whether you consider that first slaughter of the Helvetians, when a quarter of their number were caught on the far side of the river, to be a battle or not. But nonetheless, in that one, really 6 to 8 months, because they don't campaign most of the time in the winter, Caesar's done all this damage and changed the power structure of this region. If he thought it was destabilized before he got involved, and that was the excuse for getting involved, he's totally destabilized it now. But winter's coming, so what does Caesar do? Well, he puts his army in winter quarters and he goes back to the area just north of Rome to keep an eye on Roman politics and so to think about his next move. Now, here's the thing. You could make a case, if you wanted to, and some have, that everything Caesar just accomplished was done, in a crisis situation, in hot pursuit. Whether it was the migration of the Helvetians, which is, as we said earlier, it's like if you woke up this morning and found 200,000 people, on your border, just unexpectedly, it'd be some sort of a crisis. So that's the way Caesar portrays it. So if you give him the benefit of the doubt, you say, well, he had to react. You couldn't go back to Rome and ask for votes and authority. That's part of what you do as a head of the province. You go in there and you roll with the punches. So Caesar had to do that. And then the Germans and their involvement, that was also the same thing. They were coming over the border. It was getting worse. It was a critical situation. But now you're taking the winter off. We go from a hot blood situation to cold blood, where you can think about what you want to do now. I love the way Tom Holland, as an author, he's great at building this sense of suspense. And he portrays the Gauls at this point in his book Rubicon as sort of waking up together to the fact that they're in the process of being conquered. It's a strange thing, but it's happening so quickly. And because the Gallic tribes are, separate from each other, if they conquer the tribe next to you, does that mean you're being conquered? Well, not necessarily, and you might not be too panicked. But if enough of the big tribes near you are being conquered, and if you happen to know just a little of the history of Roman behavior in other Celtic areas, Spain, for example, or northern Italy, or what's now southern France, you understand that these Romans have a track record. They come in, they defeat the Celtic people, they begin to settle, and in a generation or two, the Celtic people become short-haired Gauls, and in a couple of generations after that, they become toga-wearing Gauls. And Tom Holland presents this case where once Caesar puts his troops in winter quarters in the middle of Gaul, it sends a signal to everyone that, hey, wait a minute, he's here to stay. And if we're going to prevent a complete takeover, as has happened to other Celtic peoples, it's time to get serious about defending this place. Tom Holland writes, quote, that winter of 58-57 BC, rather than withdrawing his legions back into his province, Caesar left them billeted 100 miles north of the frontier, deep in the territory of a supposedly independent tribe. Once again, an illegal measure was justified by the proconsul as an act of forward defense. This was an argument that may have satisfied public opinion back in Rome, but it did nothing to ease a mounting sense of outrage in Gaul itself. The full implications of Caesar's new policy were by now starting to hit home. What precisely would satisfy the Romans' desire for a defensible frontier? If the Rhine to the east, then why not the Channel to the north, or the Atlantic coast to the west? Across frozen forests and fields, from village to village, from chieftain's hall to chieftain's hall, the same rumor was born. The Romans were aiming to pacify all Gaul, that in quotation marks, as warriors burnished their glittering, jewel-wrought shields, and striplings eager to prove themselves ready for battle forded ice-sheeted streams with full armor on their backs. So rival tribes sought to patch up their differences. Free Gaul prepared itself for war.
That changed everything.
I think a sure sign of the way Caesar was thinking during this time period is his excuse for going back into Gaul and continuing to fight, even though these things, these crisis moments that had forced him to respond are done with. He says the very act of these people deciding to work together against him justified him going after them. This is from my Carolyn Hammond translation. When Caesar refers to Caesar, he's talking of himself in the third person. And when he talks about the Belgae, he's talking about this kind of Celtic people, as he describes it. To the north of the area he's been campaigning, the people that actually make up what was the population of modern-day Belgium, part of the Netherlands, part of Germany, and part of northeastern France, a much larger area than modern-day Belgium, and some of them may have migrated across the Channel to southeastern Britain, too. But it's these tribes of Belgae that are uniting against Caesar, so he points out that, well, obviously, it's a conspiracy. Hammond translation says, quote, as we mentioned above, Caesar was in Nearer Gaul, where he heard a host of rumors, confirmed by a letter from Labienus, that all the Belgae, who make up 1/3 of Gaul, as we said before, were hatching a plot against the Roman people and exchanging hostages. The reason for this plot were as follows. First, they were afraid that our army would march against them now that all the rest of Gaul had been subdued. Secondly, they were being stirred up by a number of the Gauls, some of whom had been unwilling for the Germans to have any further involvement in Gaul, and were equally reluctant for the army of the Roman people to overwinter and become established there. Others were of a volatile and unstable disposition, the sort of men who delight in changes of rule. Yet another group incited the Belgae to conspire because it was common in Gaul for men who possessed some degree of power and the means to hire support to seize regal power, something which would be more difficult to achieve under our rule. End quote. Now, if we look at this as a neutral arbitrator here, once again, Caesar is essentially indicting these people for doing exactly what they should be doing, if you think about this logically, because Caesar's just smashed one of the most powerful tribes in Gaul. He's got the support of another who are Roman allies. He just kicked the dreaded Germans out, if you believe that these really were Germans, and he's taken the surrender and submission of a bunch of other Gallic tribes who are cowed now by what he's accomplished. And these people to the north, all these tribes that Caesar says are, he kind of implies that they're part Celtic and part German. But this is free Gaul at this point. These are the tribes that have the ability to raise a lot of troops and still fight Caesar. And Caesar says, and it's not hard to believe, that these fifth columnists from friendly tribes and tribes that have already submitted are, secretly whispering in the ear of the Belgae too. In other words, there is an anti-Roman insurgency in Gaul, and Caesar's talking about it here. And once again, the simple fact that it exists legitimizes his involvement in the region to stop it. Allegedly, this tribal confederation in the north, these Belgae tribes, will be able to put together almost 300,000 warriors. Not women, children, old people, and all that, but warriors. Again, you can't help but contrast that with what the Native Americans are trying to resist. Expansion in North America with 1,500 or maybe 2,000 really good day warriors, and here Caesar's trying to figure out how to tackle with no guns, right, with no cannon, nothing like that. 300,000 native peoples. Even if that number's high, what if it's 200,000? One of my favorite stories, which kind of in my mind shows how, you can do things in different ways and accomplish the same goals. When you think of the really bureaucratic ancient states, when you think of an Egypt or a China or an Assyria or a Rome even, and you think, okay, when they needed an army, how did they muster it? How did they put it together? How did they raise it? You think of a really bureaucratic affair. The only thing missing are the iPads for these people. There'll be paper records. There'll be all kinds of stuff. It's a modern, organizational situation where you raise armies. So how did tribes do it? Especially tribes that had lots of people. Well, there's an ancient source that says that the Celtic method for this was a variation, if you will, on the idea of last one in is a rotten egg. It's last one who arrives to the muster gets tortured to death in front of the army. Isn't that wickedly efficient, and yet in a decentralized sort of tribal way? We're not going to get too specific about it. There's not going to be written records. We're not going to do all that. But the last guy who shows up to the muster, we kill him by slow torture in front of the whole army. Just so you know. See you soon. I love that. I hope that's true, just because that's wonderfully colorful. And yet the problems these tribes have is that they need all these people to resist Roman encroachment. But the larger these so-called barbarian armies get, the harder they are to feed. Just imagine instead of 300,000, we'll play with a nice smaller number, 200,000. Well, that's, 2, 3 modern football stadiums? How long can you feed that with barbarian logistics? And Stonebrook, who I love to quote because he's so materialistic and down to earth and scoffs at everything, he points out that this is where the unsexy advantage of the so-called civilized bureaucratic states really is. The ability to feed
Not that I talk
that they're there to fight.
I'm on video.
Doesn't matter how
much I talk about other people there.
Or if the army has to break up because they can't find food, you're not creating an army of 300,000 people then, are you? Or a bunch of smaller armies spread out over a wider area trying to find enough stuff to keep your troops from starving to death.
College got it.
And that means the enemy can defeat you bit by bit, which is what Caesar does. Caesar will also have his Gallic allies attack individual tribes that are part of this Belgae confederation and keep them busy while he concentrates on other ones. Once again, Caesar says that these people are particularly ferocious, and once again, he blames it on the fact that they're not corrupted by Roman luxuries, that they're a long way from Rome, which keeps them somewhat insulated. I've read archaeological works that do say that the farther north you go from Rome, the smaller the towns get, the less urbanized sort of core you have, the more the governments begin to resemble governments that have gone out of fashion in the parts of Gaul closer to Rome, like aristocracies and kings. So maybe there's some truth to it. it's hard to explain why these Belgae people were so much tougher than the surrounding Gauls, if indeed they were. They don't seem to have been more numerous or better led. They don't have better equipment or training. They don't have more money. I mean, none of the things where you might be able to say, well, there's a legitimate reason why these people lord it over the Gaulic neighbors. Caesar says it's basically because they're tougher and more ferocious. You don't accept that because that's a stereotypical rhetorical trope, and it is. Well, how do you explain it? A friend of mine, I was a military history major. I went to college. He had the best answer.
Yeah, man, I had you dead. Really? If anybody I like, it fucking is.
He wasn't believing any of this stuff.
But like, I like
in his mind.
What?
Any question about how tough this
They
tribe
could call you a
was,
war
how tough
criminal.
that tribe was. It's all stuff Caesar throws in there to make Caesar look better. He says you can never know about that
Human
kind of stuff.
rights,
So he's
a
going to use
bruiser.
the only
All I
facts
know
that
is the
have
worst
out
thing
there
that you ever did,
form a
my
most
opinion,
likely scenario. He said the one fact on the table here that is clear from everything
take
and
a
that screams through the sources is that
box
this
of
Roman
cigars or
army
something.
was incomparably better
You're
than
cool,
the
my
foes
book.
that they faced.
Really? Yeah. Why? Because you were always on the
It's not a
fucking
very
front of
good
the
story,
paper. It
though.
was
They
like,
talk
oh,
about
okay.
how
So this guy's got something. There'd be some kind of new map and dotted lines everywhere. I'd be like, oh man, dotted lines are the ones that mean something. It's the straight lines don't have walls. Dotted lines have walls. Really?
It was no competition. A child could have commanded the Romans and destroyed the barbarians. That's not a very good way to frame your self-promotional piece that you're sending back to Rome, is it? My friend just doesn't buy any of that. In his mind, the only thing
You ever just want to rip the scab off so
these
badly
battles sound like slaughters.
and then just squeeze it so all the blood comes out? But it's not all blood. It's
Near-run moment, yes, it was touch and go for a while, but then we crushed them. It doesn't really seem that way. And the Roman advantages are hard for most modern people, certainly for me, to really understand, because there's something about the way we're raised in this technological era that we live in. And whenever you talk about vast differences between military capabilities, we assume it's got to be mostly technological. And that's easy for us to conceptualize. If you say, one side of this battle had machine guns and the other had bows and arrows, our modern brain goes, oh, well, that's a slaughter. Right? The technological difference is going to equal a certain outcome. But if you tell us the two armies, 2,000 years ago, were really different in terms of what they could do to each other and how nasty they were, but they're very similar in terms of actual weapons technology, it's hard for us to understand what it is that makes up the differences that could account for that. And of course, all the experts who really understand, and there are few experts on real ancient warfare, but they'll tell you, this is what drill and discipline does. This is what equipping basically most of your troops with armor and metal helmets does. And we used an example once of imagine two NFL teams deciding to have a football game where one team is not allowed any pads or helmets or anything. And now imagine that both sides are actually playing with edged weapons. It's a lot more nasty even than pro football. You can see where that might be a big advantage. Also, so you throw that in with the drill. There's a lot that goes into it. But it's not, as I said, a very good story. If you say the Romans came and destroyed the barbarians and it was no trouble at all. In my friend's mind, that's why you need to keep pumping up this next tribe that Caesar's been facing. You thought that was bad, this one's even worse because it begins to get a little monotonous. Caesar's not losing any of these battles. He's not even coming close, really, until you end up with one of these tribes doing what common sense would dictate at a certain point.
But it'd be really funny to go with your friends and have like Caesar's say, on Halloween after I thought I was a good chance to boy, but I just everybody just feel and like he says some two I'm curious and like peek after the rest of it.
You don't have to, right? It's not prescribed. And it's hard for certain cultures sometimes because when you get to these warrior cultures that have a heroic sort of personal ethos where
you should be like, oh, it's online, I had to have. I read it.
Right out in front of other
Like,
people,
you can't
fair fights and
you can't
duels
believe
and all
everything
that
you read
is
on the
part
internet.
of the makeup. To talk about subterfuge confusion,
Hey,
ambush,
look.
stuff like that. Well, it doesn't always mesh so well with the warrior spirit, but believe me, necessity is the mother of invention.
Really? All those
And
ladies
when
who
Caesar
are
goes
fucking
to
guys
take on the various tribes,
those are all
the Belgae, by the way, is another the first thing that happens is they get these
Jason,
large numbers of people together, which they can't feed, so Caesar apparently waits them out.
You guys are great.
There'll be some skirmishing, a little bit of that, but it
They're
looks
like
like Caesar's plan is to just sit there and absorb all the food he can from his own logistical services while he watches the enemy around him, supposedly in the 300,000 numerical
So you know the
range,
clarification I hear.
starve. So of course I have to go enhanced up
Fund my
because he's the
depression.
logistical guy.
Space guy.
Delbrook explains Caesar's foray into northern Gaul where the Belgic people live and says, quote, the Belgae, also Belgae, had a premonition of their impending danger, united their forces, and when Caesar crossed their borders, moved out against him with a large allied army. But civilization has means of warfare that are lacking to barbarians. The Belgae were no doubt capable of assembling a large army, but not of holding it together and feeding it. Just as the Cimbri and Teutones, those barbarians from Caesar's birth period, had to split up on their campaign into Italy and were defeated individually by Marius, Caesar, instead of moving immediately into a decisive battle against an army of the same size as his, or perhaps considerably larger, found the means of splitting up the allied army so that he could then deal with only individual tribes. In the meantime, Delbrook writes, Caesar had organized 2 new legions, so that he now had a total of 8. With his auxiliary troops of Numidians, Cretans, Balearics, and Gallic cavalry, his army may have well numbered 50,000 combatants, and a grand total of 80,000 to 100,000 souls. In order to feed such a mass in one place for a rather long time, one must have a very strong and reliable organization, transport, suppliers, and finance system. The Romans had such means, whereas the Belgae did not. And then he points out that wicked ability of the Romans to sort of make stationary field fortifications a battlefield weapon. Delbrook says, quote, but Caesar had still other means at his disposal. He set up a camp on the north bank of the Ain River, and his army was so well equipped with tools, and his soldiers so well disciplined and so well trained in their techniques that within the shortest possible time, an impregnable fortress stood
Most
there.
durable.
They give you an idea of size varied depending on how large the Roman force that needed to be in the camps happened to be. Some of these camps could be well over 100 acres in size. They always had a ditch and they always had a rampart, and the Roman soldiers carried sharpened stakes when they marched so that at night they could stick those stakes into the earthen rampart, so it became a pin cushion around the camp. Guard towers and walls, and every day the camp stayed in the same spot and didn't move. It became more sophisticated, deeper, more defensible, more finished. They were there long enough, Roman tents, which were laid out on a prescribed Roman grid system, which included a main street inside this little Roman town. These tents would turn into cabins at that camp where they were long enough. So the artillery, and they could put it up so fast, you know, as we said earlier, soldiers, about half soldier, about half construction worker. And that construction worker side was more important than you might think. Your fans, the Romans know already that it's something that they brought to the table, which was unusual. There were other armies that could create camps, and were obsessive about creating camps to protect themselves, for example, went on campaign. But the Romans almost used their construction ability in an offensive way. It's fabulous. Plus, of course, you're a component, in which case, you know, how disheartening is it to think, okay, we've got a nice relatively open battlefield here, we're going to fight these Romans tomorrow, and then wake up in the morning to find fortifications on that battlefield. And artillery. And I should point out, when we say artillery, we obviously mean Roman and Greek style artillery, nothing gunpowder. In this case, a lot of it is what's called torsion devices. And I've seen these ones, and I still don't understand the principle, but it involves twisted sinews and it stores up a lot of energy when it's released. You can fling stones or projectiles that look like arrows or spears. from these weapons. And by the way, these weapons come in all shapes and sizes, and the very largest of them are rather enormous. But in this case, most of the ones we're talking about are lighter weapons. Caesar specifically, in one of my translations, refers to one of the artillery pieces involved as a 1-pounder. And I had to go look that up. A 1-pounder means the stone itself that this weapon flung weighed 1 pound. But I read another source that talked about the fear of these stones flying through the air at high speed and the sound they made, the fear that generated sometimes if you were on the receiving end of those. Maybe this is how you outclass an opponent. When your weapon systems are not all that dissimilar. They're both using edged weapons that are metal. They both got spears. They both as you can see, in tactical battlefield stuff, the Roman artillery is pretty awesome. Having the logistical and organizational capability to build a fortress overnight, that's pretty important in effects too. Add to that, we're talking about the ability to fuel your army on campaign. That easily explains how Caesar's campaign against these tribes of Belgae actually worked out. As we said, he may be facing 300,000 of these warriors up in the north here near the English Channel, but how do you feel? The barbarian army there large. The answer is apparently they don't. Caesar says the tribes come together and have a meeting and say, we gotta go home. Everybody's gotta go back to their own homes. We know we can feed ourselves. So we'll all go back to our own homes. And when we get there, if Caesar attacks any of us, everybody will come to the aid of the attackers, right? Just to render divided is to render that is a realistic defense strategy, some sort of pact, or whether it is a cop-out sham to cover up every man for himself or every tribe for himself sort of attitude. For those curious, hands don't look falls into the latter category. These tribes decide to break up and go home. Well, let's pretend it is 300,000 people. When they decide to go home and they've been facing Caesar, how do they even go about this? I mean, is it like, did we compare things to Woodstock, the Woodstock rock concert earlier? Well, what happens when Woodstock breaks up? Lots of people in large masses just sort of go streaming in the opposite direction. So what do you do if you're Caesar and you're an opportunist? Well, you attack, don't you? He sent his cavalry running through these crowds of people, spearing them, shooting them, just running them dead, killed untold numbers. And all of these Belgic tribes ran back to wherever their tribal homeland was. They seemed to have decided that they were going to hold up most of the time in these hill forts of theirs, which, by the way, if you've never seen one, go look at an aerial photo. They're awesome. Essentially, what these people did was find, nature's fortification, where nature had crafted a wonderful area to defend and then added human touches, some timber or some stonework there, and what have you. But if you have a nice, flat, giant hill, they have these nice river that curves around the side of it, forming defensive obstacles. I mean, they got a pretty good start. A lot of these tribes maybe thought that they could hold out in these locations, and they were wrong. Apparently, all Caesar had to do was show up to some of these nasty, scary tribes that he talked about, and the second they saw him, they gave up. One tribe, a nasty tribe, tens of thousands of warriors. Caesar says they saw the Roman siege weapons and went, I'm out. If you're going to use those, I'm out. So overawed by Roman technology there. He says another one of those big, nasty tribes, he didn't even get within 5 miles of their hill fort, and they were coming out to say, we're done. He says the last of the big tribes that was opposing him was this tribe called the Nervi, or the Nervii, way up in the north, right? Scary. The north. He says that they took their people, their wives, their children, their elderly, their animals, and their baggage and their possessions, and they took them into the deep, dark swamps where the Romans couldn't get them. They were going to resist. So, of course, Caesar takes the army into the land of the Nervii. And he says one day, they're deciding where they're going to camp for the night, because we talked about that. I'm obsessive about the camps, but if you're as bad at scouting and reconnaissance as the Romans are always joked about being, as one of my friends also said, if you're as bad at scouting as the Romans are, you better have a good camp with big walls and towers. In this case, Caesar has his army arriving in a long column down a road, because we like to talk about field battles all the time. Let's understand that most of the time these armies are on the move, but when they're on the move, they're stretched out in a long line like a snake all the way into the distance. very vulnerable position to be in. And when the head of the snake arrives at the campsite for the night, Caesar tells those legions that are there first to start building the camp. The legions at the very tail of the snake won't be arriving for some time. Caesar chooses another one of these hills that if you've been paying attention, he likes all throughout his writings. He likes a nice hill. If you put most of his army on it size-wise, he likes a nice, gentle slope on one side. He loves it if you can have a terrain feature to guard a flank, and in this case, there's a river at the bottom of the softly sloping hill, he says. It's about 3 feet deep, but it's there. Then he says on the opposite side of the river is a mirror image of his hill. It slopes up from the river gently. He says there's about 200 paces. So just about a couple of football fields of sort of open country, and then there's a wood on the top of the hill. So Caesar has the legions put down their packs, put their military stuff aside, get their hammers, their nails, the timber, the shovels, and begin making the camp and transform themselves into these amazing construction workers. Meanwhile, he says, and this could be open to question by the authors, because what's about to happen here will earn Caesar some criticism during his own lifetime, and from military experts ever since. But he says, I put out my cavalry and my light troops and had them screening this whole operation, right, to protect the vulnerable legions that were under construction at the moment. As more and more of my troops arrived from the column, eventually Caesar will have 6 legions there building the fort, more on the way. And he says, my cavalry is skirmishing with some of the Belgae cavalry. And he says, and then my baggage comes into view in the distance. So the Roman baggage is in the middle of this long column, and it comes over the horizon, and everyone can see it. And he says, when that happens, that's the signal for the ambush to start. He says that there's an army of Nervii in the woods on the opposite hill from Caesar's. An army. As my friend said, right, if you're going to be so bad at scouting, you miss the army of barbarians in the woods across from where you're building your camp. You better have a strong camp. In this case, right around the time Caesar's cavalry gets close enough to the woods maybe to figure out what's in there charges out of the woods. Caesar says an astonishing speed. That's by Carolyn Hammond. Carolyn Hammond has the great line, astonishing speed. Caesar goes on to say that they brush aside his cavalry and light infantry screen like an insect basically, and they come screaming down the hill. Now, we have no idea how big this hill is. All we can say is that they stream down that hill, they cross the 3-foot river, they start up the next hill, and that's the hill Caesar and 6 legions are on, not ready for this. Now, we talked earlier about why we chose this as a subject. I said I was fascinated with the tribal people in this situation that we've seen all throughout history, trying to resist the encroachment of a more technologically and organizationally superior, more efficient culture. And I chose this one because, unlike the Native American example, the African example, these people had a chance to win. Now, they were never the betting favorites, and the way that they performed so far in battles against the Roman army demonstrates that. The numbers are so much larger than what the North American Native Americans, for example, could have put together, that you can see why you got to give these people, to go boxing, the puncher's chance. Good luck with figuring out how many people there are here. You're going to believe Caesar, you're going to get up to numbers that are like 75,000. Those seem absurd, but there's a lot of Romans there, and that's pretty confirmable, so it's not going to be too low. If you said 20,000, that's going to be 4 times the largest Native American force I've ever heard of. 4 times, and we're talking about it charging out its own once. 20,000 would also be about how many Zulus were at that famous battle in 1800 wiped out a force of 1,300 to 1,400 soldiers from Britain. But the truth is, it's probably larger than that. So if you said 35,000 men charging out of the woods within running distance from you, and that's how long you have to get your act together before they hit you. Try to blow you away like a wave blowing through a few bathers on the beach. Caesar goes into overdrive at this point, and you begin to see what makes the guy so special. He's not Alexander the Great or Rabbi spear leading the cavalry in charge. Caesar does grab a shield, he says, but he begins to go and demonstrate leadership. He also says that these veteran troops do a lot for themselves. Caesar had left their officers with him, so all of them would simply throw down their work tools, grab a weapon that they could find. Caesar says their shields were still in the leather cases, their helmets weren't often around, and they just ran to the nearest standard. They forgot anything about going to their own unit. They're just trying to form a block of human beings that can resist this onrush that's coming toward them at full running speed. Let's understand something. The Nervii tribesmen here are participating in a huge gamble because they certainly know that they are going to be like blown horses by the time they reach the Roman lines. They're taking this gamble that there won't be any Roman lines when they get there yet, that they're going to be able to attack these Romans while they're still divided and in small clumps that are unconnected to each other, in which case they should be able to just pull away. But the gamble is if they don't, they're not going to have a whole lot left. If this turns into any kind of a long-term slog, they're doomed. Caesar says he grabs a flag. He says a couple of words of encouragement to the unit that he's with before going to the next unit to talk to them. But by the time he gets to the next unit, they're already engaged. This is a moment here where these legions and Caesar with them could easily be overrun. It allows us to play with some counterfactuals we haven't really been able to discuss yet. The first counterfactual is, what if Caesar loses here? The second counterfactual is, what if Caesar dies here? In the first case, we had said earlier that the Roman expansion into the tribal territory, the rich tribal territory to the north of them seemed inevitable, just like Manifest Destiny seemed inevitable. Maybe the question to ask is, how many deaths would it take to make something that seemed inevitable not inevitable anymore? Because we can see that only about 65 years after this battle, the Romans will be ambushed by another tribe of people, or tribes of people, this time in Germany, modern-day Germany, and they're probably what we could call Germans. They will destroy this Roman army in a famous battle called the TRUMAN. Involved in 9 AD, I believe it is, the Roman commander will commit suicide on the battlefield to avoid falling into the hands of his barbarian opponents, which, if you believe the hyped-up Roman sources, is a good thing to do because the Romans conduct it's legendary, would be a good way to put it. A legendary mission a couple years after the defeat and debacle to recover what's left of their dead comrades. They go into the deep, dark forest and supposedly tales of Roman skeletons stapled to the trees, piles of skulls, and religious altars with dead Romans and blood everywhere. Just this horrible, tribal, nightmarish visitation of all, shall we say, the native frustration of the situation. Innocent. You have the famous story of the Roman Emperor listening to this general. Varus, give me back my legions. That was over 15,000 Romans. Whatever happened there was one of the main components, supposedly, that made the Romans decide, what we have to do is to fight Germany. That's a good place to just send them. That played that large of a role, the Romans decided not to go to Germany anymore. What if Caesar lost twice that many men at this battle? And what is twice that many men in a larger scheme of things? So if you say, German nations have ever done anything to show Manifest Destiny? Well, I don't know. What if they killed 30,000 American soldiers in an afternoon? That wouldn't do the math. Is he to be the states first? But I went to some common sources and I added up all of the combat deaths the United States has suffered from wars of independence or not independence in this country up until the First World War started. And then I subtracted the Civil War because those are crazy deaths. Everybody knows that. So, total U.S. combat deaths excluding the Civil War up to 1917, and it's almost certainly under 30,000. Lost all the people who lost from independence to the First World War, minus the Civil War in an afternoon. That slowed down manifest destiny. How much? It's made to a garlic kingdom on the inner side and western side of the Mississippi early on, inflicted 30,000 deaths after the United States. Part of his battle line, if you can even call it something as organized as that, whichever part is the most threatened, right? Wherever the 911 call is, he's going to go there. When the Belgay, when the Nervii managed to hit his troops on the left are able to get off, he says they throw with their pila, the heavy javelin, and they charge down the hill. That is one group of Celts or Belgay. They will beat them, chase them down the hill, chase them over the river. The warriors will then regroup and charge the Romans again, only to be beaten by the left wing of the Romans again. And that left wing will start advancing up the hill towards where the Celtic camp is. Caesar's center will also weather the storm and manage to do something similar by beating in hand-to-hand combat the warriors that they run into to their front. They will also advance. Now the problem is with the left and the center advancing, you end up with an open space. The Roman right wing no longer has any protection. They're uncovered on the flank, you might say. And Caesar says a giant group of these Nervii tribesmen with the commander in like a giant hammerhead column push through this gap. And then once they're past the center point, some of them turn around and begin to smash into the flank of Caesar's right-hand units. Some of them go straight on ahead toward the Roman camp with thoughts of looting and burning and pillaging. So Caesar's right-hand legions are now in trouble. He runs over to them to try to help. Meanwhile, when the Celtic forces, the Belgay forces, break into Caesar's camp and start looting, the people that see that think the battle's over. Caesar says his cavalry and light troops that had been brushed aside like insects and beaten so badly when this first starts are just now wearily straggling into camp. They look up and they see the very people who just beat the hell out of them running rampant through Caesar's camp, and they go, "That's that," and they run away. All of the civilian and average Joe camp followers run in fear. We're told even that Caesar is very tough, supposedly Celtic allied cavalry sees these Belgay running rampant through the Roman camp and figures they're done too, so they turn around and go home. In other words, Caesar's bad situation is getting worse by the moment, so he runs over to the right flank where these units are in desperate trouble and basically portrays the situation as dire and collapse of the right flank as imminent. Here's the way Caesar describes the difficulties on the right flank. This from my essay Hanford translation. And remember, when Caesar writes Caesar, he's talking about himself in the third person. Quote, after addressing the 10th Legion, Caesar had gone to the right wing, where he found the troops in difficulties. The cohorts of the 12th Legion were packed together so closely that the men were in one another's way and could not fight properly. All the centurions of the 4th cohort, as well as the standard bearer, were killed, and the standard was lost. Nearly all the centurions of the other cohorts were either killed or wounded, including the chief centurion, Publius Sextius Baculus, a man of very great courage, who was so disabled by a number of severe wounds that he could no longer stand. The men's movements were slow, and some in the rear, feeling themselves abandoned, were retiring from the fight and trying to get out of range. Meanwhile, the enemy maintained unceasing pressure up the hill in front, and were also closing in on both flanks. As the situation was critical and no reserves were available, Caesar snatched a shield from a soldier in the rear. He had not his own shield with him, made his way into the front line, addressed each centurion by name, and shouted encouragement to the rest of the troops, ordering them to push forward and open out their ranks so that they could use their swords more easily. His coming gave them fresh heart and hope. Each man wanted to do his best under the eyes of his commander-in-chief, however desperate the peril, and the enemy's assault was slowed down a little. End quote. But the legion next door to that was having even worse trouble, so Caesar ran over there. He ordered the commanders of that force to put his soldiers into a square so that they couldn't be outflanked and attacked from the rear anymore, and that stabilized that situation. Historian Adrian Goldsworthy writes about this moment, saying that Caesar had stabilized the situation on the right flank, but the collapse was still imminent. It was just a matter of time. The Celtic force was battering these Romans down. But two things happened that ended up having the same effect on this battle as the Romans having a third reserve line has done in the previous battles. Remember, they don't have a reserve line here because they don't have a line. They're not deployed. But what ends up happening is those Romans that had been victorious initially on the left, that had gone and captured the barbarian camp on the opposite hill, were now able to look down and see the problem that Caesar was facing. So they began to come down the hill to renew the fight themselves. Plus, the legions at the very end of the column, the tail of the snake, have finally gotten to the top of the hill and looked down and see what's going on. And they now enter the fray. So even though Caesar wasn't able to create the traditional Roman third line, the reserve line to throw in, when everything was going to hell in a handbasket, the circumstances had in effect created one. And the legion that came down after capturing the Celtic camp, and the ones that came up in the rear of the baggage train, turned the tide of the battle. And remember, these Belgae, these Nervii, and related tribes had sold their soul for that initial charge. They were like blown horses, as we said. The arrival of fresh troops is the worst thing that could have happened to them. But Caesar says they were tough, they were ferocious, they would not give in, even when he had them basically, compressed into a disordered mob, and he was killing them all with missile weapons so that he didn't even have to risk his troops. He said the warriors stood on top of the corpses of their friends, pulled the spears of the enemy out of their shields, or caught them in the air and turned around and threw them back, yelling defiantly to the Romans, even as they know how the afternoon is going to turn out. A ferocious warrior enemy, allowing themselves to be absolutely decimated rather than run away. Once again, let's remember Caesar has every interest in portraying to be as incredibly nasty and brave as possible. Nonetheless, maybe they were. Caesar says that after the battle, the families that had taken shelter in the deep dark woods or swamps came out, sort of begging his clemency, which Caesar gives and was known for giving plenty of times. Let's point that out and be fair to him. It was part of his act, part of his shtick, part of je ne sais quoi. Sometimes I'll let you live. But he did. He also says, though, they gave him a rundown of what they suffered in the battle. He says that they told him of 60,000 fighting men, they only had 500 left who could carry arms. Now, that doesn't tell you if those people are all dead, or if they're incapacitated from wounds, likely a combination of both. We have no idea what the breakdown is. And they also point out that Caesar has destroyed their leadership in this battle. They say out of 600, the different translations say different things. One says senators, another says counselors, another says magistrates, but out of 600 of these leading figures in the tribe, these survivors tell Caesar only 3 are alive. So for all intents and purposes, he has destroyed this tribe. Now, he did it in battle, and that's going to make a crucial difference soon. Now, there's one little bit of leftover business, though, that Caesar accomplishes right at the end of this battle. One of the tribes that was coming to help the Nervii never made it to the battlefield. Found out the results, turned around and went home. But that doesn't get you out of trouble with Caesar, who follows them back home. He has a very confusing incident involving, the deals of a surrender that maybe were misinterpreted. Nonetheless, bad things happened, so Caesar eventually had to storm the town, kill a lot of people. He says he sold 53,000 people from the population into slavery, and points out that he sold them all in one lot. Roman version of storage wars or something. How much for this entire city of slaves? at 53,000 at a bargain price. And the slaves now, let's recall something. This is money. Cha-ching, you sell the slaves, you make money. It's one of the things that comprise booty, money, stuff. You know, whatever you can take and sell, whatever you can take for yourself. Sometimes Caesar would gift slaves, who weren't slaves 5 minutes ago, let's point that out, to his soldiers. You know, each one gets a slave. That is a nice little Christmas bonus if you're a Roman soldier or any soldier. And a couple of historians say, but no one knows because it's not like we have a financial statement on how Caesar's doing each year. But you stop hearing about Caesar's terrible financial crunches now, and he's seen distributing money more. He's allegedly paying his troops more than the going rate, and he's sharing the winnings with them, which is pretty normal. But if you're doing really well, the winnings can be really good. And as a side note, all of you who know the Roman story understand this. There's a process underway here that will play, mightily into the destruction of the Roman Republic very soon, and that's the allegiance of this army not necessarily being 100% entirely to the Senate and people of Rome, but increasingly more and more to this man, Julius Caesar. And he's far from the only Roman general this is happening to. His fellow members of the triumvirate are getting into similar situations. On the allegiance of the troops, because how they're doing in life is so dependent on that single figure at the head of their particular army. When their allegiance shifts from the state to a single individual, you can see how the recipe for disaster is just, the chain reaction has already started, right? Rome's problems go deep into the distance, but that's a key component that has to happen. And what I always tell people that they see parallels with the United States today and the Roman Republic is, yes, there are some, but you're missing that key component, and it's important. We don't have armies that are beholden to single military individuals more than they are the state. Increasingly, as this army and Caesar bond together and share the fruits of their labors, they are. So the question of whether Caesar's in debt anymore seems to be that he probably isn't. In fact, this little business venture in Gaul is working out pretty well indeed. So Caesar says after this little battle with the Belgae, he sends a message to Rome, and he says, and let me point out, not for the last time in his commentary, Gaul is pacified. Now, let me stop for a minute, because if you say not for the last time, is Gaul really pacified? Because again, you have to wonder what Caesar's doing here. He may have had a whole lot of reasons for going back to Rome at this time period and telling them, hey, the war is over and we won. You can see some advisor notes in Caesar. You have no idea what's like on the ground in Rome right now. We're trying to get these people elected to the Senate. It would really help if the timing were good. You said we won in Gaul, right? I guess what I'm saying is I trust Caesar and his intelligence, both his mental intelligence and his reconnaissance, enough to think that I doubt whether he thought Gaul really was pacified, because let's look at what just happened here in 2 campaign seasons, so less than 2 years. Caesar conquered a place the size of Texas. Plutarch says 300 tribes? Really? And you expected to stay subdued? Well, if he did expect that, he was wrong. And if he didn't, well, there must have been another reason for telling people back in Rome that the war was over. Caesar, in a rare, obvious brag in the commentaries, points out that when the Romans heard that Caesar had just won in Gaul, they proclaimed 15 days of Thanksgiving in the capital. Caesar points out is a longer amount of time than anyone before him had ever had a Thanksgiving declared in their honor. So maybe that accounts for it right there. Let's remember why Caesar's in Gaul doing all this to begin with. Because of how it's looking back home. 15 days of Thanksgiving, an unprecedented amount. That makes it all worth it right there, doesn't it? Depends on what your goals are, of course. Now, the other thing that needs to be pointed out here is how victory has a way of forgiving everything. Because there is an undercurrent in Rome amongst prominent individuals, admittedly prominent individuals that don't like Caesar anyway, would find something to get him with if they could anywhere, but that what Caesar's doing is grossly illegal on many fronts. He's raised legions out of his own pocketbook and without permission. His opponents in Rome have pointed out things that he's done during this campaign that are violations of Roman honor, and one or two of them will suggest maybe they should be handed over to the former Roman enemies as a, well, let's put it this way, the Romans have done that before, where some Roman general on the ground made a deal with another city, came back, the Roman Senate repudiated the deal, sent the general back to the former opponents in chains, left him out sort of in front of the front gate and said, sorry, he couldn't make a deal like that, that's against Roman honor, but since he did, here, you can have him do what you want. For people, of the Cato camp that were maybe suggesting that Caesar deserved treatment like that, but very few people were listening. You know why? Because the guy just conquered an area larger than all of Italy itself in 2 campaign seasons. You can hear the crowd going, Rome, 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 we're number one. I mean, come on, when in human history have the populace not celebrated an unbelievable victory? It's almost weird to imagine the general public ever doing the opposite. So what it took for Caesar to get these victories, legal or illegal, are totally overshadowed by the result. The result may be an illusion, though. Caesar says that after he's done here, he goes and starts to look at the next big venture he's going to do. He's finally going to go into Illyria, around where the modern Adriatic is. He's going to start conquering some tribes there, which had been a plan of his all along. But now that Gaul is pacified, he can put some time into it. He says while he's there, Gaul erupts back into war. It happens so fast you can't help but wonder if it was ever pacified at all. And there have been some theories floated in a bunch of books I've read, which I think is fascinating. I'm going to run it past you because it would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? And it's the idea that maybe the reason Gaul almost immediately erupts into trouble after Caesar says it's pacified is that maybe they didn't fully understand what they were agreeing to when they said that they were going to submit to Rome. In other words, Rome is treating them as though they have signed a contract, and if you break the contract, the ramifications are, mafia style in nature, so don't break the contract. And maybe like a bunch of Native Americans who are expected to read like a lawyer this treaty, and yet they can hardly write their names in the white man's language, maybe these Celtic leaders were essentially taken for a ride. Their barbarian lawyers not as good as the Roman ones. Maybe as soon as they started living under the real terms of the deal, maybe it was a little different than they thought. And one of the very well may have treated them in a much more laissez-faire, hands-off kind of fashion. That might have been their idea of a client in their world. But now the Romans were coming in, and these are going to they'll send surveyors to your property. Let's see what the property line is here. Oh, we're going to settle some former soldier veterans on part of your property. We're going to take your son into the army, and oh yeah, taxes are going up this year, and we need extra wheat because the army's starving. I mean, whatever it might be, the Gallic people are chafing at what it's like to be a Roman. But now I think we get to the crux question that we started this talk out with. Will you be willing to sacrifice everything for? If you're chafing, isn't that the word I just used? If you're chafing from Roman domination, at what point is the chafing bad enough for you to risk having the Romans come back, beat you in some sort of field battle, kill you? What did we say before? Kill your sons, rape your wives, send your daughters off to slavery, destroy you. At what point is chafing bad enough to earn that? We can get into this question of motivations. But what is it that's worth risking that kind of terrible outcome for?
This is what he was like.
Caesar
the last
says it's
6 months or really,
and freedom and
but
independence, and that's
he would make sure that
not because those
he always
are
had shit.
motivations, but because Caesar's the guy who's going to stamp out these people.
Ever out of his mouth, but I noticed this one
Once
time he
again,
was
he's
like falling
giving them
asleep, and he
aspirations.
started to, which made it
We
different.
can sort of
I thought he
relate
just
to
fallen
make
asleep,
them sympathetic characters to us in the same way
he
he's
just
put
stood and not.
the voice of an almost
And
war crimes
I
prosecutor
remember
in
he
the
had
mouth
this,
of his
like,
German
it looked like a
opponent.
custard, it was like a
Vistus.
mucus or something that
He's going to
came
put,
down.
in the
and
words of people like
it makes
Patrick
it sound like
Henry, give me liberty or give me death, and
he
all
had
those kind of
a
people
nurse
into
there
the mouths
every
of
day,
these Gallic
and
opponents. whose liberty he
My
is
mom,
smashing.
and it wasn't like he didn't.
It's fascinating, and again, it's very complicated.
Like,
I don't
it was
fully
like this,
understand
and I
it. I
remember
enjoyed
saying,
Andrew
"Mom,"
Henry
I used to
because
start
I said
yelling
on
for
the
her, "Mom, come here," and she was
analysis,
just in the other room.
but no consensus exists. They just analyze the three-dimensional chess game Caesar's playing.
Grandpa died.
And of course, the first question we all
She's
ask,
like, "No,
right, is if Caesar says that these people are fighting for liberty and freedom, and when he puts words into their speeches and they talk about liberty and freedom, what the heck do people, barbarian people, 2,000 years ago mean when they say that? Or if Caesar's putting those words into their mouth and they're Caesar's words, what does Caesar
She
mean
said,
for
"Go
it to
get
mean?"
my purse. There's a mirror in that."
According
We
to
have this
Andrew
comb
Henry, it's just what you think it means, maybe only more so.
folded in
He writes the word and then gives you the
my
line
mom
what
loves
Caesar
this
actually
little
used. He says,
commercial.
quote,
You could like see your
freedom, libertas, was an even more politically charged term for the Romans than it is generally today, for it is deeply rooted in the pervasive social institution of slavery. Despite the many and varied situations to which it was applied, libertas remained a powerful slogan because of its unambiguously positive primary sense. Conversely, slavery, servitus, recalled the degradation of slaves seen daily in a society which, as we have already noted, personal dignity was a fighting matter.